So I wanted to shoot a quick video here, guys, about, I've been having this conversation in particular with one of my students, but the difference between self-defense and martial arts, and you can even break this down even more, the difference between, say, self-defense, martial arts, combat sport, and street fighting. But self-defense in itself is a broad term because basically what we mean is we're trying to end a threat. The difference between self-defense and those other things is particularly mindset. Right? Self-defense is about ending the threat. It's about staying safe. Personal protection is another term that we use more commonly. But the point is that it's not about technique. It's not about style, right? It's not about what is better than self-defense. Self-defense in and of itself just means protecting yourself and removing the threat, whether it means removing yourself or taking that threat out. So that would be like the first sort of basis to understanding what the difference is. It's the mindset and the mentality. So is everything that we train in martial arts, couldn't we call that self-defense? The combatives that you're training, and depending on what kind of arts you're doing, but let's say for us, we do very combative martial arts here. Muay Thai, Kali, JKD, Jiu-Jitsu, etc. But again, it's about the method, and it's about the training method and the training mentality. If you're truly concerned about self-defense, then you need to get closer and closer to the actual situation that you might be in for a self-defense response, for a physical response. You also need to consider the context. What is the level of threat that you're dealing with? Are you protecting yourself from we like to use the term a drunk uncle at a party or someone at the bar, or is this someone that really intends to do you harm? This is going to dictate what type of response you use and what sort of tools that you're going to utilize in that situation. So now, what does this mean? Am I saying that, your martial arts are useless in a self-defense situation? No, I'm not saying that. But there's a bit of a stretch here to say that when you get on the mats with your buddies here and you're, let's say take jiu-jitsu for an example, and we're rolling and we're only grappling, we're working on very combative techniques. If we put them to their fullest extent, you can hyperextend someone's elbow or shoulder or what have you, but that doesn't equal street violence. That doesn't equal defending yourself. The tactics and the mentality and the sort of goal is very, very different, right? If I'm in a self-defense situation, if I'm on the street, my goal is not to submit my opponent. My goal is to either take that guy out or get away from that guy or guys or people. And so it's a whole different sort of mindset. So again, what that equals, I think, is how are you going to train your martial arts? How are you going to train those tactics? So I want to be really clear here too that yes, a highly trained mixed martial artist, I was talking about combat sport for instance, a highly trained mixed martial artist is going to have an advantage in a physical confrontation, especially against an untrained person. But again, that depending on the scenario that we're talking about, right? And street fighting, this is where I differentiate self-defense from street fighting. Street fighting is a consensual combative situation. You deciding to fight somebody. Now, yes, sometimes you might get jumped and you have to fight your way out of it. But again, the mentality is very different, right? So yes, a trained fighter will have an advantage in a physical confrontation with an untrained fighter. I believe they'll have the conditioning, they'll have the tools, they'll have the striking of power and the grappling and all that stuff. But again, that's not training for a self-defense situation, in my opinion. So one of the advantages, one of the mentalities that concepts that we use in Jeet Kune Do is absorb what is useful. And I think that gets overdone. I think people sometimes reject things too quickly and absorb things too quickly. But if we're talking about, say, a self-defense context, one of the things we do want to develop are highly effective tools to end a physical confrontation quickly, right? So if we are brought to that point where we need to use what's called a maximum physical response, right? A high level of physical response to the threat, then we want things that work fast, that aren't necessarily take a lot of time to develop. And then again, those of us who do train will have those attributes dialed in, but we need to focus sometimes. If we're really concerned about self-defense, we have to put ourselves in those positions, in those situations as close as we can, and then train those tools at a very high level, at a very high physical response level. Now, another question that comes up quite a bit is sparring in martial arts. And for us, again, we do Muay Thai kickboxing, we do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and boxing and things of that nature. And sparring is an essential part to developing as a martial artist, as a fighter, because again, obviously you're training against somebody is now in a, they're not in fixed techniques, and you're using, you're working on your response and your angling and your distancing and your timing and all these things that are very, very important. Obviously, especially if you're going to fight in the ring, if you're going to be a competitive fighter, you have to spar. You have to learn how to flow with somebody and how to counter somebody and time them, et cetera, et cetera. But sparring, again, is people mistakenly equate to a streamline to self-defense. And sparring really does not have anything to do with self-defense out that, because when we're defending ourselves, especially in a highly contested moment, we need to go through them. And when it comes to the sparring as it relates to self-defense, and I know this is controversial and some people are going to argue with me about that. There's a great video from the Urban Combatives guys, and I'll put a link to it. And they from Netherlands, the Urban Combatives in Netherlands. Awesome group, awesome videos. The content's amazing. And their training method's amazing. But, he goes through a great example and a great explanation of the difference. Yes, sparring's good for you because you get used to pressure. You get used to getting hit. You get used to things that you might not be used to as a normal person, right? But it does not equate to street violence, self-defense, personal protection. Again, different type of training method needs to be executed, needs to be practiced over and over again in those contexts. And that requires I think, even more skill on the training side of things, so you really know how to respond, what kind of energy to give. So what I'm saying again about the JKD concept then is taking what we feel is going to be the most efficient. Now, again, the problem with self-defense is we have so many scenarios to base off of. So what are we talking about? When you're sitting in your car and someone jumps in your car, well, your kickboxing goes out the window, right? If you haven't trained certain angles of attack, then it's going to be very foreign to you. Are we talking about multiple opponents? Are we talking about, outside? An easy one for people to get their mind around is, say, going to their car at night in a parking lot and some guy comes up to you, you're at the ATM and somebody approaches you unwanted, right? But you also have other types of scenarios that, again, might not call for high levels of response, but maybe you need to contain that person. So then you need to start thinking about your training methods and your training tactics and techniques and start to break them down into what can I use in what situation and what am I going to train more and more, right, to have that skill set. So again, an example would be if I'm in a physical clinch with somebody, or I'm sort of holding somebody off. If I have skills, if I've trained, say, inside arm drags or duck unders or things that can get me to someone's back, where I can control that person and maybe even talk them down more, or take them down to the ground, or even put them unconscious without having to, put them in the hospital. That sort of thing, which is a higher level of skill, I believe, to be able to contain somebody and control somebody than it is to maybe say, take out some soft tissue targets and do damage in a blitzkrieg type fashion. So there's different contexts and there's different sort of scenarios, and then the tools that you're going to develop are going to be, applicable in those areas. So part of the deal is what I would say the difference between, say, self-defense training and your martial art training. Your martial art is about personal development, right? It's about this personal perfection, whereas self-defense is personal protection. We want to make things simple, easy to access under highly adrenalized, situations, right? And we want to train gross motor skills. So again, where it really comes down to is your training method. How are you going to train these tools? How are you going to train these tactics and these skills? And to what degree? So, you could start with in the dojo, on the mat, with, cooperating partners, but then giving you, more and more response, taking it all the way to where you're situationally trained, right? So now you go outside, you wear street clothes, you try to emulate, you try to simulate a scenario as close to reality as possible, so that your brain can then access those tools and those skills because it's more familiar to that potential situation, that potential threat. Kind of the last point I'm going to make about the difference between, say, self-defense and martial art training, because again, these are broad terms. What martial arts are we talking about? Are we talking, again, I'm just using what we do at our school, but the other side of this too is that in self-defense, you have a whole slew of other attributes, skills, and qualities that are going to dictate your success in a self-defense situation. Because again, our goal is not to win a fight or look cool doing it. Our goal is to end a threat. So sometimes that means evasion. That means just getting the hell out of there. That means having high level of awareness skills, having attitude, having certain attitudes when you're in certain places. The mentality aspect of it is probably bigger than the physical aspect of it, because we want to avoid violence. We want to avoid the situations when we can, right? And sometimes we can't. So we want to have the tools, and we want to have the tactics to end that threat as quickly as possible and as efficiently. So we put together a free video course called Appear Weak When Strong. What it really is based off of a Sun Tzu quote in The Art of War, Sun Tzu's Art of War. And it really comes down to the art of deception, which is an element of self-defense, right? Is that you're seemingly weak, seemingly passive, seemingly submissive, and even from de-escalation positions or from weak positions, being able to execute, being able to act thoroughly from those positions, what tools you have at your disposal, but also sort of lulling the attacker into complacency, right? So again, you might want to check that out, guys. It's a free course, very basic, but give you some really solid tools and ideas for how to end fights quickly, how to fight from, you know, kind of weirder positions, if you will, right? How to get up from the ground properly, et cetera, et cetera. So check that link out below, guys, and thanks for watching. See you next time.